Get to some football. Joe Marino from Locked On Bills, Locked On NFL Scouting, Squad Show with Jeremy and Joe Ostrowski as well is now on the Western Hotline. Morning, Joe. Thanks for taking some time out. I hope it's not pouring rain and cold like it has been here for the last couple days.
Well, we've had a good amount of rain here in the Charlotte area as well, but I will say, Joe, give yourself some credit, man. You say all these hockey player names. Yeah, I think you can handle these tennis names for sure.
That's right. That is true. Yeah, I guess that's right. I guess if I just watched the sport as much as anyone else, then it would probably be the same. So that's right. Hockey, you definitely get a lot of that. A lot of consonants in certain names. So anyways, Joe, OTAs this week, and there's a lot of storylines to get to. James Cook not being there. Your recent show on putting the target puzzle together for the Bills, I wanted to get into a little bit. I actually wanted to start, though, with the injury news that we had this week about Joey Bosa already having a calf injury, hadn't even really got on the field yet in any capacity. And that obviously presents a question about his availability. And I wonder if your thoughts on how the Bills are set up to withstand injuries to Bosa. If his season goes, something like what Curtis Samuel's looked like last year, where maybe he's in the lineup here and there, but you're always wondering how healthy he is. How you feel about the Bills' edge group as a whole if Bosa becomes less reliable than we'd hope?
Well, file the Bosa calf injury firmly under things that are annoying. That's not the news that anybody wanted to hear, although it is early, and he sounds like things will be good to go for training camp, and he'll have his opportunity to ramp up. And Joey Bosa is a veteran. He turns 30 in July. He knows how to play football. And, the reality is you want this guy to be healthy and firing on all cylinders late in the season when the Bills have kind of had their lull in defensive line production, particularly in the postseason. And Joe, I never thought of it, but I think invoking the name Curtis Samuel is not a bad one, mostly because if you look at the arc that Curtis Samuel had last year, I know it was probably mostly disappointing, but at the end of the day, the guy was still like fourth in target percentage last year for this team. And then he was really important in the playoffs. He caught the fourth down touchdown against Kansas City. That was critical in that game being close at the end. He had a big touchdown against the Broncos in the postseason. And so I think that would be exactly what you're looking for, some moments in the postseason where it was instrumental in the Bills either winning a game or having a chance to win a game. And so I think that's what it comes down to for Bosa. Obviously, you'd love him to be there all season, available, making an impact. And Bosa's got every incentive to do that. I mean, there's incentives in his contract for sacks and playing snap percentages. And then, of course, he's not 1,000 years old. That's what people need to remember. He turns 30 in July. Pass rushers age very, very well. And this is a huge year for him because if he goes out and meets production thresholds and plays a bunch of snaps, this is his big opportunity not only to earn those incentives that are baked into his contract, but to have the type of year that is going to position him for a $20, $25, $30 million a year contract if it goes the way that it could this year. So I think the Bills are rightfully taking things slow with him. It's all about what he's going to do late in the season for this team. And at the end of the day, there's still Greg Rousseau. There's still A.J. Epinesa. And those are players the Bills have won a lot of games with as their featured defensive ends, not to mention you have Landon Jackson as a third-round pick that I think most people are excited about. Javon Solomon, year 2, gives you a lot of pass rush upside. And then Michael Hoyt does come back after 6 games, which, ideally you'd have him from the outset. That'd make you feel better about if Bosa had to miss time early. But this is all about late season, making sure Bosa's ready when the team needs him most. And obviously there's a lot at stake for everyone involved for Bosa to go out and have the type of year he's capable of having.
I'm curious if you think that Landon Jackson can take a bigger role early in the season given Michael Hoyt's suspension and if they want to load manage Joey Bosa, right? And what you've seen from him, Joe, coming out of the draft and doing that work. Is Landon Jackson ready for maybe to have to play a little bit more than maybe they planned on, if that makes sense?
Well, I think he has that type of skill set where you feel comfortable with what he offers in terms of size, length, athleticism, power, experienced player coming out of the SEC that I thought was very much ascending, getting better every season. And he probably is going to have to. He's probably going to have to. If Bosa's going to miss time early and you don't have Hoyt, He's your defensive end 3. I think he's going to play 35 to 45% of the snaps if that winds up being the case. And, you heard Sean McDermott talking about Landon Jackson this week and called him mature and conscientious. And I think those are good words to invoke for a guy that's young and probably is going to have to play. And, Sean McDermott, I remember at the owners' meetings when he was chatting with the media and talking about even before the draft, he's like, it was with the suspensions of Hoyt and Ogunjobi. He said, look, we're probably going to be really light or really young on the defensive line to start the year. And it's certainly shaping up for that to be true. And so I think that's the exciting part is maybe Landon Jackson gets some more reps that maybe wouldn't have been there otherwise early on. And he's a player that, due to the depth of the defensive end class, he was available at the top of the third round as so many different guys came off the board. I think in other classes where it's a more normal defensive end class, he might have been the 5th or 6th defensive end taken. And so could be a big opportunity for him. And obviously you hope that he can cash in on what's in front of him.
Joe Marino with us on the Wester Hotline, Locked On Bills podcast. Joe, no James Cook at OTAs this week, the only player that was absent, which has kind of reset the conversation on his worth to the Bills and the contract dilemma and whether he'll hold out or not. I wanted to ask from you how you see his value to the offense. We were looking just the other day trying to figure out, what is fair for him to get on another contract per year. It's a very simplistic way of looking at it. There's none of the guaranteed stuff, but there are only 3 backs in the league that make more than $15 million per year. And someone like McCaffrey, for instance, is so integral to the Niners' plan of what they want to do as an offense, and Derrick Henry and Barkley too. How do you see Cook in that conversation? Not even how good is he is one part of are you worth the $15 million that he wants, but how do you see his worth to the Bills' offense more than how good he is kind of isolated from that?
Yeah, I think that James Cook's a valuable player to the Bills, and his ability to make explosive plays in the run game is a huge factor for this Bills team. And he's a very nuanced runner that has good vision, and he's had great growth, right? Like, the Bills preach draft, develop, re-sign, and to hear the Bills talk about initially James Cook coming in as we drafted him to be a pass-catching back that has now turned into a guy that is their lead running back that has really evolved, whether it's his own running style to be more physical with consistency, to reduce and eliminate fumbling issues, to take care of drops, to improve his vision and his overall instincts as a runner in the zone scheme. It's been really good. I mean, the only thing that is really missing is the pass pro component to his game, which does limit his role on passing downs and 2-minute situations. And the Bills don't use a lot of running back to block. I think there was like 50 plays all of last year where the Bills actually kept the running back into block on over 580-something dropbacks. So they like to use a lot of 5-man blocking surfaces. So the lack of pass pro is mitigated because of the way that the Bills play offense, but there is still 2-minute drill, end of half situations where you need to have a back on the field that you trust that, hey, if we can't send you out on a route, that you can stay in and handle things. And I think that's where things get dicey with James Cook, and I think that's where they lean into Ty Johnson in those types of situations. So I think that James is a very good player that is extremely valuable to the Bills, but I think that the Bills are valuable to James Cook as well. When you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, when you have the run scheme like the Bills have with the run blocking, I think there's a lot that James benefits from being in this ecosystem to play his best football. And I think that's part of the equation. And I do wonder what factors are important to Brandon Beane. He hasn't paid a running back, and we've lived this life really for the last decade where it felt like every single running back that was available for trade, a first-round running back, a free agent running back, the Bills are in, and then it never happens, right? They haven't really made a huge investment cap-wise into a running back. And so is there something that could be different? I mean, the Bills know who James Cook is. Are they adverse to meeting those demands because they don't want to put those types of resources into the position? There's so many questions in play here. And, obviously James Cook is going about this in a unique way that we haven't necessarily seen yet under Brandon Beane, where, negotiating through the media and making statements with his attendants and different actions, putting the house for sale, whatever you would want to point to. It's a different strategy that a lot of extensions have been handed out in Buffalo, and they've always been tied to consistency and work and showing up. And, so it's definitely a really uncharted territory. I'm curious to see how this ends. And I guess back to the root of your question, I do think that James Cook is a valuable player, but I also think that the Bills are very valuable to James Cook.
And spending a lot of resources cap-wise on a running back or any position is far different now when you take a look at dollars than it would be even 6-7 years ago, where you might think, let's say $10 million even for a running back, Joe, is a far different deal now than it would be several years ago. But when you start getting up to 15 over that, I think that's when it becomes polarizing for fans, right? Of, man, you're talking about only 3 running backs in the league that make $15 million or more. But you're not also, if you get to 10, it's a different situation than it was 5-6 years ago when the cap was far different.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's important to approach this conversation from a percentage of cap at signing more than APY, average per year, where
Agreed.
The cap's gone up, over $50 million over the last 2 years? Comparing APY today versus 2 years ago doesn't make sense. And it's going to go up again, right? Probably another 15, 20 million this year. And so that's why I've really rooted a lot of my conversation less in APY and more in percentage of cap. And when you look at a percentage of cap, I think the sweet spot for James Cook is 4.5%. You have Josh Jacobs is at 4.7, and then all those other guys, the John Taylors, the Kamaras, McCaffrey, Henry, Barkley, they're higher than 4.7%. Then you have James Conner, who's at 3.8. And I think right in the middle of the cap right now is $12.5 million. Well, that's not 15, and I think James wants 15. And I think you might listen to me say, pay him 12.5, but don't pay him 15. And you're saying, well, Joe, you're splitting hairs over $2.5 million. Yes, I am. Well, because $2.5 million is a lot of money. Yeah. There's only 26 players on this 90-man roster that have a 2025 cap hit of more than $2.5 million. And you start, 2.5 here, 2.5 there. Now all of a sudden you're talking about not being able to pay a starter because you've went more than what you believe is the correct valuation of a player. And so the benefit to James Cook, if he were to wait, if you were to go to 4.5% of whatever the cap's going to be next year, that's going to be higher. So does this all just end in James Cook, showing up at some point, probably when it's mandatory OTAs and, of course, for camp, having the best year that he possibly can, and then, I think the Bills might be willing to say, hey, if you think you can get that, go see if it's there. This is what's waiting for you here, and it'll be here for you. But if you can go beat it, go beat it. And I think maybe James Cook will be surprised at what contracts are out there for him and which ones aren't.
And if he does find it, then you get a comp pick. So there's always that.
Maybe.
Right.
Depending how it falls. You're right.
And be calculated in your own decision making, right? That's the thing is like, I love draft picks probably more than anyone in the whole world. But I'm not going to completely change my free agency strategy and reduce my player pool because I'm obsessing over a comp pick, right?
Right.
I still want to go get the players that I think are most important to help my team, and as opposed to a third or a fourth round pick the next year.
Sure, that's right.
And by the way, for a comparison to Joe's point about the percentage, there are only 5 Bills who make over 4% of the cap. Josh is at 13%, by the way, which is obviously. And then Dion at 7.16. Dawson Knox at 5.22. Matt Milano 4.37. Ed Oliver 4.03. Even if they were to franchise tag him next year, Joe, which you could do, at $13 million, you're still talking 4.5% of the cap.
All right.
Yeah, well, and I think the 2026 projection, if I'm not mistaken, is a tick over $14 million. And that becomes very, very difficult,
right?
Because that's a hard number, right? I mean, that's a hard commitment to.
Yes.
There's no wiggle room with that, and I think I don't think that's going to be on the table for the Bills.
And I like the way you frame too, as we transition to a different thing I wanted to get to. The $2.2 million, like how it might not sound like a lot, but it could be. That's a signing. I was looking at Elijah Moore's contract earlier, and his is, I think it's 2.5 is the cap hit, at least for Elijah Moore, so that number's pretty similar. And you did an episode recently, Joe, on figuring out the Bills' hierarchy, like what it might look like, target share, how much the Bills, throw the ball in the first place. And Moore, got some headlines this week, it's OTAs, so take it with a grain of salt, but looking pretty good. And I wonder, how you see the whole picture, but even more specifically, Elijah Moore getting some work in with Josh Allen and the offense, how you kind of see him figuring into this puzzle.
Yeah, it's really difficult. So I posted an episode that's technically my Thursday episode, but I went ahead and posted it yesterday because I do content. I want it to be out there. I don't want to sit on it. So I put it out there.
Yep.
And I tried to figure out this Bills 2025 target puzzle. And it's tricky because I don't think there's that many targets available, and not necessarily vacated targets, but just generally speaking, how many times are the Bills going to throw the football? And in 9 games under Brady in 2023, Josh had 33 passing attempts per game. In 19 games last year, and of course I'm not factoring in the Patriots game, 19 actual games, Josh threw the ball 29.7 times per game. So I think he's going to throw the ball about 30 times a game. And then you have to take out, 4% of those for spikes, batted balls, and throwaways. So you're left with about 17 times 30 is 510, and taking out 4%, that gets you to 490 targets. That's all I have to give. And maybe you would say that the Bills might throw the ball more this year because the defense might be better, or they didn't throw the ball as much late in games because of blowouts and being ahead, and they ran the ball, and sometimes Josh didn't even play the fourth quarter. Well, if the defense is better, that's still going to be true. And here's the reality. The Bills last year they're just not a high-volume passing team. They were 26th in passing attempts last year, 28th in percentage of plays that were passes, 5th in percentage of plays that were runs. The Bills are not a high-volume passing team. They just aren't. They haven't been under Brady, and I don't think that's going to be different this year. And so now you have 490 targets to spread around, and I'd encourage you to go through the process. Try to figure out that puzzle. Take 490 and spread them out to all these receivers, and you're going to be left thinking, boy, I wish I had more. And if the Bills throw the ball 3 more times a game and you get 50 more targets for the year to work with, that's meaningful. And the margins are pretty slim, but how do you factor in Elijah Moore? And basically the way that I approached this was I said, between Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel, and remember, Curtis Samuel had 10.5% of the targets last year in a year where he was injured a lot, missed a lot of time. They still, when he was available, they got him the football. I said for Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel, you probably have to look at that as 80 combined targets. And it could skew heavily one way. I think there's a chance that one of those players is completely irrelevant in this offense this year, just because it's a very difficult puzzle to crack. And so there's going to be chemistry that's going to be established. It'll take on a life of its own, right? That'll all happen. But I think we have to acknowledge that of all these players, and I know it's everybody eats, there's just going to be some guys that we're talking about right now that maybe even we're excited about just aren't going to have that big of a role, and it'll sort itself out. But if you're being honest about how many times the Bills are going to throw the ball, it's probably not going to be that many. If you go to FanDuel right now, the over-under for Josh Allen passing yards is 3,775 yards. Like, it's understood that the Bills are, Burrow's going to throw the ball 680 times this year. Josh Allen's going to throw the ball like 520 times. It's just how they play. We'll see how it takes on the life of its own, but cracking this puzzle is difficult because there's just not that many targets to go around.
Joe Marino, you could check out him putting that puzzle together on his Thursday episode, but I'm like you. If I do one like Wednesday night for the next day, I'm just putting it out. Just putting it out. Why not? Why wait on it?
Yeah.
So check that out, and of course, NFL Scouting Podcast as well, and Bill's Squad Show. So as always, great conversation. Thanks, Joe, and we'll talk next week.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Joe Marino.